Why do people take the path less traveled and choose an operating system based on Linux over the proprietary based ones from Microsoft Windows and also the Apple Mac OS? So, welcome to the intriguing world of Linux, an operating system that's been quietly revolutionizing the tech landscape. There are common misconceptions that Linux users are akin to tech hermits, they shun the mainstream, and they desire something that is less complex but also less user friendly. One of the quotes that a friend of mine had whenever the topic of Linux came up was that, "Oh, Linux, that's horrible. That's a horrible operating system. Those are the people that use it have their feet on backwards. That way they think they're walking forward and they're not. They're walking backward." And that was his attitude. And I think it still is. But, is that really fair? Is that really the case? So today we're going to take a journey down the open source path and we're going to explore the present and well, maybe a little bit of the past, but the present and the future of Linux as a desktop operating system. And we'll look at some of the reasons why many are looking at the Penguin badge and choosing freedom and flexibility over the confines of traditional systems. It isn't about being different or having your feet on backwards. It's about embracing an operating system that values user control and customization and community. So with that, let's get started and delve in. I'm DJ Ware, and this is the Cyber Gizmo. I could I could start out with what everybody always says. Here are the reasons why people use Linux. It's open source. It is stable. It is secure, and you can customize it. But everybody says that. Everybody knows that. Today I'm gonna look at some things that you probably haven't heard, and these are based on my experiences with Mac OS, Windows, and yes, I have recently just thrown Windows 11 away again. I had to recently use it because my laptop that came with the Intel Ultra Core in it wasn't quite ready to run Linux as a daily driver yet. But as soon as that happened, yeah, I not only deleted Windows. Actually, I didn't delete Windows. I actually took the NVMe drive out of the system. So yeah, let's just get rid of it. So that's been I don't mean to bash on Windows. There's a lot of people that use it, a lot of people that are happy with it. But I'm going to show you, instead of bashing on Windows, I'm going to show you the reasons why I chose Linux and talk about some of the experiences, even recent ones that I've had with Windows. And hopefully that'll help answer some of your questions about why I use Linux. One of the reasons why I use Linux is I got tired of the Windows updates. Windows updates, they used to come on a certain day. Back in the day, I think it was update Tuesday, and then it became update Thursday, and then it became update whenever they felt like it. And the problem with it is that at least in the home edition, that you ended up with updates coming at times where you didn't want them. And every time you do an update on Windows, because of the architecture that they use, they reboot, and a lot of the installation processes occur both as the system is coming down and when it's coming back up. The other thing that I always found annoying about Windows is that in the past, now that's not so much true today, but in the past, they didn't pick up all the updates. So they had this chain of dependency that worked from the versions that were actually installed on your system. And sometimes those updates would move you to the next level of dependency, and all of a sudden there'd be updates to that. So it was like a game. You'd start an update and then you'd find there was another one, and then you put that one on, and then you'd find there was another one. So it just became annoying. It just became really annoying. Linux does have updates and they occur pretty frequently, but in a lot of cases it doesn't require a reboot. By default, if you replace the kernel on Linux or you modify drivers that are being, installed during boot time, yeah, Linux will stop and it will restart. It'll recommend that you restart. Even that can be gotten rid of. There are tools that you can, I think you actually in some cases have to have a subscription to use them. They're really meant for enterprise environments where you're in a nonstop environment and the kernel changes and you don't want to reboot. That's an outage in the enterprise world. And if you're in a 5 or a 6 nines environment, you don't have much time for outages available to you during the entire year. That could get you sued by your customers. So yeah, there are ways you can restart the kernel without having to reboot the system. We all know that Linux is secure, but is it more secure than Windows? Well, Windows and Mac OS both have had major breaches in this past month. Apple had a breach where they had a problem with their passwords, and Windows had a problem where someone had inadvertently installed a test account into the production environment that had basically root access over all of the users on the systems. And so hackers were able to exploit that in order to gain access to Windows servers. And they could have gone after the clients as well. This is because Windows and Mac OS have a lot more users, you'll see more security issues with those because they get discovered. And they seem to both be kind of a popular platform to attack, especially the iOS variants of Mac OS as well as Windows itself. But Linux does have protections that are built in to make some of the attacks on Windows and Mac OS to be impervious on Linux. So there are some protections that are in place in the Linux kernel that will help you. Does that mean that Linux is free from cyber security risks? No, absolutely not. Windows is very open about it, and so is Apple. Well, Apple is open about it after the fact. Whenever they patch something, then they'll tell you, oh, there were security patches, and if you click on it, you can, on the message, it will take you to a release note that explains kind of what they did, but they are not forthcoming on the actual scope of the security fix at all. Whereas Microsoft definitely is on their side. So not trying to bash Windows at all. So don't get all in an uproar. What I'm trying to tell you about is how I think that Linux is a better environment overall than either of those two. So one of the big things that I use on Linux is I'm able to lift out my drive on no matter what system I'm on and push it into a new computer. And up that will come and it'll operate with the drivers that came with it. I may have to update the kernel in order to take advantage of the new hardware environment. But basically, I can just plop it down on a brand new computer and I have everything that I had before. So in Windows, if you tried that, you may run into an activation issue. And I ran into that with my most recent experience. So as I said, I had Windows installed on the laptop when it was shipped to me, and that's the Core Ultra from MSI. So it I had to use that until I was able to get a Linux environment stable and up and running, and that took a couple of weeks to finally get a release of 6.7 that was installable on it, and then I could then transfer full time over it. But so I was stuck having to use Windows for a while in order to complete my daily work. One of the problems that I ran into is that the machine came with Windows Home. I didn't want to be on Windows Home. I wanted to be able to play with WSL. And so to do that, you have to be on Pro or above. Well, I have a Pro license that's not in use, but if you've ever used it before, you can't activate it on a Windows machine. I don't know why. I have never been able to do that. You would think that after so many months, and this has been inactive for, gosh, probably 3 years, you would think that Microsoft would go, "Well, this has been inactive for a while. I'm gonna allow it to be activated again." No, no. So I tried the activation upgrade through their GUI, their wizard, no go, it failed. And it suggested some things. I did those suggested things, those failed. Finally, I had to call Microsoft support. So the first thing that Microsoft support has to do is, are you who you say you are? So they have a list of questions that you have to answer. Well, I haven't called Microsoft in 10 years. And they're asking me questions about what is this? What is that? What is that? And I have no idea what I had given you as that. So finally we got through that and were able to verify that I was who I said I was. And then they had to I had to go in and get uh some kind of device ID and send it to them, and then they came back with a new product ID. By the time I got all done with this thing and him going through this long key sequence and me copying it down to put it into the machine, about 2 hours had passed on the telephone with this guy. What a stupid waste of time. One of the things that Linux does is it doesn't do that. You don't have any kind of DRM protection on Linux. So if you want to download an ISO file of Canonical's Ubuntu, or you want a Debian download or a Linux Mint, you can download it once and use it on as many machines as you'd like. Yeah, there's no there's no you can even install it as a server. You can install it as a desktop, client. You don't have any of those barriers that are in front of you. If you were to install yes, I know, you can go to Microsoft and you can download the Windows servers and probably the Windows clients too for free. They'll let you use them for a period of some number of days, and a lot of people will just renew those requests to continue to use it free forever. But if you attempt, that's fine if you're using it in your development environment on your private machine. But if you were to deploy that that particular way in a enterprise environment, you're going to get caught. Is the thing there. And when you make the switch over to installing, let's say, a Windows server, you have some pretty hefty license fees you have to pay. I know that the company I used to work for, they spent, I don't know, it was upwards of almost $1 million for all the employees to have Windows and to have the Windows server support for all those, because you not only have to license it for each machine, you also have to license it for the users that are going to be tied into it. So, yeah, it starts to crawl up there and get expensive in a hurry. So, one of the other things I like about Linux is that it comes with the device drivers built into the kernel. So, there's nothing, I don't ever have to go out and install a driver if I plug in something for the first time into it that Windows has never seen before. Now, in the Mac OS space, that is so heavily controlled. Good luck getting something to work that's not a class compliant driver. So yeah, Mac OS, and I think Windows does too. They have what's called class compliant drivers. Those typically are around the USB for devices that are like keyboards and mice. There are class compliant drivers for that. They may not give you full support over the device, but they'll give you basic functionality to allow you to type on your keyboard and move your mouse around and be able to see it. But they may not necessarily turn on the LEDs or any of the advanced features that come with your devices. In Linux, you don't have that problem. It's installed in the kernel. All you have to do is plug it in. The only problem you have with Linux is if the device driver doesn't exist and hasn't been developed yet. We do not they always people that use Windows will point at Linux and blame us for not having device driver support for their favorite devices. But here's the truth. The truth is, Linux does not allow non-open source device drivers to be installed in the kernel. Why? It would taint the license for the Linux OS. And so, yeah, there has to be an open source development of that driver. Trying to get companies that seem to be stuck in this, oh, this is proprietary. I can't tell you how my mouse works. The world would end if I did that. So yeah, they won't release it. And then it's left up to Linux developers to back engineer or reverse engineer that device in order to get some modicum of functionality out of it. And that's what happens in a lot of cases. One of the most infamous players in this space for proprietary systems is NVIDIA. And that's why a lot of people have trouble with NVIDIA video cards on Linux, is because NVIDIA, yes, they have opened some of their driver support, but not all. They still keep tight control on CUDA. They still keep tight control on this new feature they have that allows for AI to be run locally on your machine. So, yeah, and that was just announced, I think, 2 days ago. That's only going to be on Windows and it's tightly controlled. It's not, it's announced, but not released yet. You can go and you can download it if you want to play with it, but it won't work on Linux. And that's the problem we have, is the attitude of the third party people, not the Linux. If the Linux driver, if the Linux kernel doesn't have your driver, then you have to wait until something gets added to the kernel. A lot of times I will look before I buy a piece of hardware, I will go in and look at the release notes for the kernel to see whether or not that device is supported yet or not. I'll put a link below where you can go to check that information for yourself. Each release of Linux will publish a list of changes and deletions to the kernel. Yes, they do retire drivers on occasion. So yeah, and that happens. People say that Linux is hard to set up. Printers, for example, are difficult to install. Here's the way I have always approached that. One of the standards for Unix years ago was PostScript, and there's been a PostScript driver in Linux. There's also HP PCL also is a standard driver. If you're buying a printer from God knows who, and they have closed source printer drivers, you're into the same problem as you are with any other driver. Is not going to be one that necessarily is going to match your printer. The problem is the choice of your device and trying to use it on Linux. That's the way I look at it. I go the other way. I have always purchased PostScript compatible printers, and so I use mostly laser printers to do that. And I have never had a problem installing that laser printer on any distribution of Linux that I want to. In fact, it'll even work on FreeBSD because it uses an industry standard printing language, PostScript, in order to drive that printer. So the printer sits on the LAN, it appears in Linux. Linux can print to it, everything's good. There's nothing to do other than to point it to the LAN version of the printer. So it's plug and play if you go that route. Whenever you're using an operating system, the tendency is for people to try to bend the operating system to their will. Well, that don't work. Sorry, you're going to run into more problems than you can count. The best way to do it is, instead of doing that, make sure that your next choice of printer, your next choice of devices is something that is already supported under Linux. That's my advice. That's what I always do. It's an engineering problem, right? What are the requirements to run an operating system? I read those. You should too. That'll save you a lot of pain and suffering. It's all self-inflicted, I will tell you that. The other thing is that Linux uses less memory and less storage space than Windows does. Fact. The Windows build that I had was occupying close to 80 gig by the time I got WSL on it. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I have even with the most even with the most ridiculous setups with Linux, I rarely get over 10 gig for the root file system. So yeah, it's just ridiculous how much bloat there is on Windows. Mac OS, pretty similar. My Linux environment has 4 compilers, 2 debuggers, 3 tracers, and takes up less room than the base install of Windows. So, and I don't need WSL to run Linux. It's native on my system. Yes, let's talk about that. But wait a minute, Windows has WSL. You can run Linux on it if you like running Linux in a virtual machine. So, yeah, that comes with some issues in performance because of that overhead that you have there. Linux has had virtual machines in the kernel since 2006, so that's nothing. Virtual machine use is nothing new to us. In fact, with KMU, I can even have Linux emulate an ARM CPU or a RISC CPU and generate code developed for those two platforms that will execute directly on those platforms using an Intel or an AMD environment. And you can customize that software too. And I don't mean that you can tune your machine to increase its clock frequency or the amount of voltage is going to your CPU. I'm talking about real granular modifications like changing the scheduler that sends jobs to your processor, or changing the I/O scheduler that sends information to your storage devices. Yeah, those kinds of things you can do at the atomic level that you cannot do on Windows or Mac OS. Sorry, they won't let you do that. The other thing is that Linux has a pluggable architecture, both in the ability to install device drivers, and there are two ways to do that. There are a number of device drivers which can never be installed in the Linux kernel. One of them is ZFS. And the reason for that is the OpenZFS license. It's CDDL, which Linus says will taint the license on the Linux kernel. He's probably right. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to argue with him. But he will not ever, he will never put OpenZFS, as long as that CDDL license is in existence, into part of the Linux kernel. So what you have to do is you have to use DKMS in order to add those drivers to the kernel externally. They create the modules that you need to install the device drivers. That will then allow Linux to run that code in system protected mode. So it'll give it a little bit of an advantage in performance. The second way you can install device drivers is in user land. And there is a utility called FUSE that allows you to do that. So that's meant for mainly storage type software drivers. So yeah, you'll see it used more often than that. There is a version of ZFS that uses FUSE. I don't use that one because their FUSE is extra overhead. Every time, I mean, it's great that it's out in user land. You can install it. There's no problem. It will run. It just doesn't run very efficiently. There's been a lot of changes to Fuse over the years to try to help speed it up, and they have. They have sped it up some. Linux doesn't have to rewrite its handling of, let's say a new login component for a security key that's coming out. You don't have to rewrite all of that login software and all of the pieces that are downstream from it. The reason is Linux has a pluggable architecture called PAM, and that allows it to, you can install just that component that handles your security device and allows it to be used to log into the system. So, and those new features can be added without having to rip the floor out of Linux to make it work. So that's another reason why I like it. Yeah, these are all technical reasons, but they're things that make my life easier, and it will make your life easier as well. You can also install a very minimal set of software. You can make the specific choices that you want from that minimal set of software and build up the system, adding only the packages that you want. And by the way, there is a package manager that Windows doesn't seem to really have. They've tried to make the Microsoft Store where people go to get their stuff. But as we all know, that the store is probably, if you're security conscious, probably one of the first things you want to avoid because there seems to be a lot of malware that gets injected into Windows through that vector. The way Linux handles updates is that it will install every update that is needed for your system, including your firmware for your BIOS and also for any device drivers that are internal in your machine. So yeah, it will do both, and it will tell you when it's going to do it. It doesn't just automatically start up the update process unless you set it up that way to do auto updates. I would set up if I was if and the way I do it is I install security updates automatically, but I don't let just any update fly by because that's a good way to break some systems, like some of the systems that have a rolling kernel or a rolling package base. You kind of want to do those on a periodic basis, save them up, and hopefully you'll avoid some of the problems that you can run into with that. If you don't want to install them and those package updates, you don't have to. And it's funny on Windows, it comes with so much software that one of the things that I was doing was I'd be chucking stuff off that I didn't want, Candy Crush and all this other garbage that was out there that I didn't want. So I was chucking that stuff off, and there'd be a Windows update, and there's Candy Crush coming right back again. Jeez, just what I always wanted, automatic bloatware. I can update an entire system or even a group of systems all at once. There are tools and utilities like Ansible and Puppet and some of those that allow you to do that, that allow you to maintain your updates across a whole platform of systems. So it can with a single command, I can tell it go update everything. And it will tell me if I need to reboot those systems using another command. Or if there are services that need to be restarted, it'll tell me that too. So I can even hold back those packages if I don't want them. So it can either delay and just wait on the update. It'll ask me if I want to apply it, and I can say no. If there's a package that I need a specific version of and I don't want to migrate on any update to a new version of it, I can hold it, put it on hold temporarily, and then when I'm satisfied that the new package, the new version works, I can say, okay, go ahead and install it. There are even mechanisms through flat packs and snaps and app images that allow you to install applications in a container based environment so that external changes to libraries and maybe you want to run multiple versions of a piece of software. Flatpaks, app images, and Snaps allows for that. Although Snap's a little bit harder to do, but yeah, you can do that. But what if all I want to do, let's say that I just want to use my software. I don't care about all the geeky, nerdy stuff. I just want to run Linux and as an operating system, and I don't care how it works. Can you do that? Yeah, absolutely. You can do that. Absolutely. Yeah, most of the things that you can do with Linux from a standpoint of your look and feel, your customizations can all be done through the GUI. So, and it will tell you if there's updates, there's a notification that comes down and you can say, yeah, that's fine. You can install it, or no, I don't want to install it yet. And then it'll nag you the next time that you log back on again and say, hey, I've got updates. Do you want to install them? And you can say, no, I don't. And then when you reach a point where you don't mind the interruption, you can say, yeah, go ahead and do it. So most desktop environments have that kind of facility, and I don't mean to bag on Windows and Mac OS, even though there are just some things that both of those things do. They were both great operating systems in their day. But today's world, they're both dinosaurs. And if you look at the innovations that are coming for both of them, I mean, like Mac OS, their latest big innovation was some additional smiley icons for their messenger app. Oh God, please! I mean, that is not innovation. Windows has been doing some innovation work, but they only do just in. This is typical of commercial software. They do just enough to hold your interest. They don't do anything really out, breaking the bank kind of new stuff, unless they're forced into it by their competitors. So yeah, they won't risk it. So they're both. I would say they're both quickly becoming dinosaurs, and falling way behind what Linux can do. The real innovation today, both for the enterprise market and also for the home environment, is actually happening on Linux. And the reason is because of the community of developers. It's an age old saying, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, and Linux actually encourages that kind of a workplace. So the developers will see something that needs to get fixed. They don't yell and get on discourse or Discord and complain to the world about it. They'll go in and they'll fix it. They'll go in and create something that will address the problem. And not only will they fix the problem for themselves, they'll put it out in a GitHub or a GitLab where you can go and download it as well. Or they'll tell the package maintainers about it and say, hey, I've got this code. Are you interested in putting it in the package? And they can submit it to be included in a distro if they want. Let me tell you my other experience that I had just recently. So I had a 3-day outage from my internet provider, and it was kind of interesting. They Sunday at about 4:30 a.m. I have an alarm that goes off on my server, on my main server, that says, "Hey, your internet's down," and it starts squawking about 4:30 in the morning. And so I get up groggily, wipe the sleep out of my eyes, stumble into the kitchen and grab some coffee, and then go in to look at it. And sure enough, yeah, the internet's down. It's completely dead. The lights are on. It's red. It's got an alarm on the light exchange box, which is the conversion box between fiber optic and copper Ethernet. So, uh, and that's the reason it's down. Everything's down. I have set up my system because we get a lot of power outages. Some of the storms we get in the summer are just, yeah, high winds, a lot of rain, a lot of hail, and they'll trees come down like anything, and they'll knock the power lines down here. So, yeah, it's not uncommon to go a couple of days without power. So I have adapted my system so I can continue to work on a lot of things locally. I don't trust the cloud. What I do is I use the cloud to back up, but I don't use the cloud to run. So everything that I use has to be local on my network. So I can keep right on working and trucking and playing around with stuff. And in fact, I did while I was down. I can't do everything. Like I can't upload videos or anything until the network comes back up. But what had happened was at 4:30 in the morning on Sunday, somebody decided to crack the residential interface box, which is down the street. They decided to open it and steal copper wire that was in it. They stole all the copper. And then they got to the fiber optic connections. I guess they didn't know what they were. So they cut them in order to see what they were. And of course, they're fiber, and fiber is useless. So I was when the tech came on Monday, I was talking to him, and he said, "Yeah, it's going to take us a few days to get all that back together again." But and I was like, "How much money do you think they made off of that?" And he goes, "Probably not a lot." And so I got to thinking, well, how many pieces of copper are in there? And, you know, it's only a minuscule amount. It amounts to, at the price of copper right now, amounts to about, I don't know, $32 or something that they made off of their big heist. I hope they didn't go to too many places to spend that wealth. But yeah, but they did knock down a pretty good chunk of service area in the process. So I can imagine what their shock was when they went in to try to sell the fiber optic cable. Oh, that's worthless. Yeah, it's just sand, so who cares? It doesn't have a price. Yeah, it's pretty much useless. So one of the other things I hear a lot is, and this is my concluding remark for today. So one of the things I hear a lot is you can run Linux on old computers. Well, I don't subscribe to that and I don't recommend it. And let me give you my 3 reasons why. So, first, performance is going to suck. Let's just be honest. I mean, old machines don't run as fast as newer ones. So, you're basically installing a machine that's going to run slower than most of us are used to. When I look for machines to run Linux, I go, like I said, I go through the requirements. I look at the distro. Every single distro has a list of system requirements. They tell you, you need this many cores, you need this much memory, you need this type of graphics card, you need this kind of resolution, and you need this much storage. Every single one of them will give you minimums. Then the second thing I do is go to the Linux release notes for the kernel that's being installed with that distro, and it varies. For example, Debian uses 6.1. Fedora uses the latest kernel, and they're right now at 6.7.4. They roll their kernel during their release cycle. So yeah, you are all they check it, they test it, and then they roll out a new release. So they lag a little bit behind the Linux kernel people. If you watch the Linux.org site, you might see a 6.5, a 6.7.5 come out, for example, but Fedora won't roll it for maybe a week, maybe 5 days or something. And that gives them a chance to at least do some testing with it before they throw it out to the world to find out that, uh-oh, that's going to crash everybody. Two, your old computer may not have security enhancements in the hardware, which may make your Linux machine more vulnerable. I don't know how many times I've talked to my brother likes to buy, he thinks that he's saving money by buying machines that are 10 years old. And I'm like, don't put that damn thing on the internet because the minute you do, somebody is probably going to crack it. The other problem is that, and this is really the big one, is that your old computer may be missing things like USB-C or USB 4 devices, or they may be missing support for PCIe. They might even be missing PCIe 3 or PCIe 4 support. So you may be relegated to a very slow storage retrieval rate off of those machines. That's going to make your experience on Linux pretty lame. It's probably going to cause you to go, "Wow, this thing sucks. It's slow." It is true that if you want to run, and I've got a machine back here that's almost Mm, I don't even know if I want to say it's almost 12 years old, and it still runs Linux. And it's an old Mac that's back there, and it runs it just fine. But it doesn't run it as fast as the modern hardware will. So you do have to wait more with it. And so if you're used to that, and that's the kind of experience you want, great. Just don't start hooking up anything that you purchased recently to it because you might find that you're lacking the connectivity to do it. So I don't subscribe to that nonsense about, yes, it's true you can use older hardware, but there's another reason that I don't use older hardware. Let's say that you have a machine that is, let's say it's 7 years old and you want to put it on Linux. So that machine probably has been in use for 7 years. There are devices that wear out on hardware, believe it or not. One of those is your storage. If it's rotational media and you've got a rotational drive that's 7 years old, amazing that you have one that still works after that time. You are really pushing your luck that's going to continue to work because there's a bathtub curve that on mortality of storage devices, and it starts out with it'll be high in the beginning because of what is called infant mortality, which is that's just defects that appear in the manufacturing process. And so when you buy a new drive in the first 3 or 4 months, the chances are higher that it may fail because of defects. Then you have this period of low, it's random failures, and those are those are very rare to have happen. But then as the drive ages out and this includes SSDs, you'll start to see a rise at some point in the number of failures that you get until, your chances of a failure are just horrible. So, what kinds of devices will wear out? Well, heat will affect the lifespan of any electronics device, and CPUs are in the hot seat all the time. Yes, they're designed specifically to handle that heat, but doesn't matter. Over time, heat will degrade them. It won't degrade them to the point where you might have an issue, but I can tell you that, and during that internet outage, when everything came back up, I still was down and I had to have the tech come back out again. So he did. And just as he walked in, I had unplugged the modem, which is used to interface to the internet, and wanted to reset it, and I heard a pop and it was dead. It was gone. So it was a good thing that it failed that particular day, but those kinds of devices operate under heat because they're passing packets and they're dealing with that all the time, and eventually they will fail in a very sudden and unpredictable way. They just get more predictable as you get older. And so if you're running older hardware, your curve can go up. Now, I have never, except for one time when I screwed up and accidentally and missed a pin on the installation of a CPU, actually damaged one. I've never had one go out, but I have had graphics cards fail. Graphics cards are another one that live in the heat. So, yes, they too are designed to handle it up to a point. But if for any reason a CPU goes over spec on its heat, or and that can happen if you're not maintaining that CPU very well, and by that I mean the thermal paste gets dried out and it starts to lose contact with your cooler, it might start to heat up more. The second is that on graphics cards is that if for any reasons, particularly with ones that use blower configurations, that blower becomes dirty, it's sucking in dust and gets the fan dirty. And so over time, the amount of air that's cooling that GPU goes down, and so the GPU starts to heat. If they exceed their maximum heat, you've got damage that it potentially is occurring. And so over time, that device too can fail. And I have had several graphics cards that have failed after a long run. But just remember, the older that stuff is, the more likely it is to fail. And it'll be sudden. SSDs have a lifetime as well, and so do NVMEs. Now, NVMEs are in 10 plus years. SSDs are 8 to 9 years, I think, is the recommended lifespan on those. The same thing applies to them. They have a maximum temperature that they can sustain. Rotational drives do as well. Linux stands out from the crowd for all the main reasons you've heard. It's more stable, it's open source, it's more secure. You can run the system the way you want it to run. You can configure it the way you want to have it look. But there are other reasons as well to use Linux. One of the things that I really do not like is all the tracking that's going on in the proprietary spaces today. They track everything. They track how long you're in an application. They track where you went on the internet, what articles you downloaded, what files you downloaded, and what things you bought, what things that you're interested in. And eventually it ends up back on your web pages as things. It's creepy, actually, in that when I was using Windows 11, I'd be looking at something that I wanted to test for the channel, and then all of a sudden, about 2 hours later, I start getting ads for it. That's just creepy to me. I just don't like that. I don't like that at all. There are some Linux distros that do tracking, so be careful and make sure you understand that Endless is one of them that does tracking. So be careful of that. Fedora has talked about adding tracking for the purposes of just finding out what things they need to support. But the problem with tracking is that it it is a temptation that once that data starts getting collected to take it and monetize it, make because it's costing them to store it. So they're quickly going to go, we're going to have to find a way to pay for this storage. And any manager with any brains is going to try to cut that, try to cut those losses by offsetting it by a revenue stream. So yeah, they're gonna go, I can sell this data and I will. So the temptation is always great that if you track something and you're holding data about what your users are doing, there's always the temptation to turn it into monetary benefit. And so, yeah, I that's none of their damn business what I use my systems for, and I don't like it. That is one of the primary reasons why I use Linux is because it does not track. There's no trackers in it, unless I'm using a browser that has known trackers in it, and that's a choice, right? Whether I want to use that browser or not. But at least I have the choice to seal my own fate. I did want to thank my Patreons and my channel members. Thank you so much for your support. Uh, I'm one of the things that I want to look at is there's actually two things I want to look at that I'm glad that you guys are providing a revenue stream so I can do it. Is I can go test. I want to go test eGPUs next. So look for a video coming on that sometime down the road when I can save up enough money to get one and actually start playing with it. One more thing. So, one of the things, let's go back to the quote that my friend gave about Linux people having their feet on backwards. And even though they think they're walking forward, they're actually going backwards. Is that a fair statement? Absolutely not. That is not a fair statement at all. And Linux is not just surviving, it's not walking backwards, it's charting its own path. It's driven by a passionate community, an ethos of freedom, and the spirit of innovation. It's a future that I think looks brighter than it will for the other systems, which are not innovating. They're not doing anything new. They think they're the ones that have their feet on backwards. So, but I do recognize that Linux might not be everyone's cup of tea. It's certainly, but it is certainly not walking backwards. Linux is charting its own path and it's driven by endless possibilities. Thanks for listening.